like for y'all just welcome Linda.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that. It's so good to be here in Elk City. My husband Dan here on the front row behind the camera, and I moved here last September, so we've been here 1 year now, and we're just so glad to be back out in the western part of Oklahoma. I'm from Cheyenne, went to high school there, graduated there, along with a lot of friends that still live here in the area. I was born there, went to school there a number of years, but my dad was a minister, so we lived in some other towns as well. So I've kind of been all over the state as far as living. Dan and I lived in Broken Arrow for several years. We lived in Tulsa a couple of years, and then we were in Edmond a few years. You know, you have to work for a living. You move where the job is, and that's what you do. So when the COVID hit, rolled out, or whichever the case may be, came, he worked at a place south of Oklahoma City and had to drive a lot to get there, and it was very nice when he got to work at home full-time. So that freed us up, and now he's full-time at home and has been for a couple of years now. So we're in Elk City, and I had planned some things to speak about tonight, and I was hoping to say some things that would help people in Elk City understand that although we've had a very good conservative public education system in most of our rural communities, that there are plans being rolled out that will affect all schools, and we must have local control, and our local school boards and our local superintendents must be very alert and make sure they're approving everything that gets brought into the school, into the classroom, or into the environment introduced to the children. Well, never fear. I was praying, Lord, I don't know, if they're really going to understand the importance of this, and be careful what you pray for. I didn't bring this, but it just happened to align at the same time last week. In Elk City, a survey went out, which is really quite alarming. And I will read that, and I don't know if you've all heard this or not, but it went out to high school students. Now, I'm going to be as nice as possible to individuals, because there aren't any individuals in Elk City or any of our school districts that are entirely responsible for what's happening, because it's being pushed from the federal government, from the Biden administration, through the State Department of Education, with the superintendent we have now, who ran as a conservative, but we all now know, don't we, that she is not. She switched to Democrat, and I'm not saying you can't be a conservative Democrat, because I know you can. And if we have conservative, I'm not saying they shouldn't re-register, okay? I'm with the Republican Party, so I'm not, promoting that. But I'm saying this. In Oklahoma, in years past, we've had conservatives that were in both parties, okay? More and more, we're seeing what's happening on the federal level has gotten so bad coming from the left. So let me just read the survey, and you'll hear this information. It's a support group interest survey that went out to high school students, and I understand the parents did not know about this, that it just went directly to the students. Now, if that's wrong, I stand corrected. Give me feedback if I've not been given correct information. But it went to the high school students. I talked to a teacher in Elk City today, and she said, we don't see any of that. What goes to the students is real separate from what we get. So even the teacher didn't know about this in the high school. It says, please fill out the following survey. We are just gathering interest at this time. Support group interest survey. This is a totally anonymous survey. Your name and email address is not being collected. We are currently seeing how many students would be interested in participating in a GSA, Genders and Sexualities Alliance, is a student-led organization that provides a safe and supportive environment for LGBTQ and straight youth to come together. Now, supportive and safe, who's against that? I'm not against supportive and safe per se, but when you look at the website and who this group is and what this alliance is, it's a whole different story. And I'll talk more about that. So in other words, I'm all for all students having counseling, having support when they need it, if they're depressed, no matter what they're going through or no matter what they think about themselves or no matter what their situation is and how they live their life. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a counselor available. I think that is always a good thing. Okay, it says all are welcome to attend. Again, this is to high school students. All are welcome to attend. Monthly meetings will be held at school during lunch. During lunch? So everybody's going to know, and it's gay, lesbian, bisexual, transitioning, and queer. That's what the Q stands for. That's their words. I'm glad we don't have, well, I'll be careful about some of the wording. We hope to have our first meeting before Thanksgiving break. So this is coming real quick, probably this week at school at Elk City High School. So I had my homework to do for several days to see what I could learn about what is happening on the level of counseling coming out of this situation or tracking it back. And I knew that there were a lot of grants that have gone out from the State Department of Ed that are federal money. For mental health, that's counseling involved. The federal documents all say, coming out of the Biden administration, that the LGBTQ community is particularly at risk. They need to be targeted with help and support. And it's not a matter, again, of helping a child regardless of who they are or what they do, but it's a matter of celebrating and bringing together people that are straight, students that are not in this LGBT group. And it's a matter of supporting, they call it supportive. But I've already seen a directive that came out of the State Department of Ed 2 years ago. And at the bottom, it looked like it was a legal document that had to be followed. They used Title IX information at the bottom about discrimination against sex or gender or different things that you discriminate about. They tried to make that like, if you don't do the things in this directive, then you're breaking federal law. And that's the way Biden's administration, through the Department of Justice, the Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Education. I mean, there's so many documents. I could have brought a stack that high that directly relate to what we're talking about tonight. But you can go online and find them. I've got some handouts over here that have links. If you go online, if you have kids that go online, if you don't, someone in your family, you can read documents that I'm referring to. And I wanted to do that to provide what I'm talking about, because there will be people very defensive about doing this, thinking that it's a great thing and that if we don't help these students, then we are putting them in danger. These are the kinds of speeches I've heard, okay? There was a 12-year-old girl in a northeastern Oklahoma school, a rural school. Mother was a teacher in that school, and the mom told publicly what had happened. The little 12-year-old came home and told her, "Mom, we're learning this in school," and showed her a paper, 4 kinds of SES, 4 kinds. Now, we don't even really want to imagine this, right? I've got the document, I wrote some articles about it, I was on the radio in Tulsa, because this blew up when conservative Christian parents heard. And this is a teacher in the school whose daughter was in the class. She did not know they were doing this. There was no parental consent. 12 years old, and it was boys and girls together in the classroom in a rural school. Now here's more shocking. When I tracked it down, what it was, where it came from, the program came out of Joplin, Missouri, from a crisis pregnancy center, and it came through the county crisis pregnancy center where the school was. And they had believed the lie, the marketing, selling technique that the Center for Disease Control and sometimes the State Health Department, I'm not sure where we are right now, in Oklahoma on that, and then county health departments, I'm not saying Beckham, but because I know they don't all do this, but coming from the CDC, we've seen now with COVID, haven't we, what kind of information can be sent out that's not accurate. I heard a doctor being interviewed by Harold Wright last week. He was out of Oklahoma City. He was on Harold Wright's radio program over in Weatherford. And of course, Harold was a former state senator. Harold asked him about the efficacy or the effectiveness of the shots, and his answer, I don't remember exactly how Harold worded the question, but the answer was that what the CDC has done is malpractice. And this is what we've got to understand. Our local schools, our local teachers, counselors especially right now, because of the mental health money that's rolled out from the federal government, are being pushed to do this. So what happened before, 2 years ago, when this directive came out from the State Department of Ed, some pastors got together, and a state representative from eastern Oklahoma, they called me and said, would you meet with us in Edmonds? So we had a meeting, this was 2 years ago, and we looked at this situation. They brought a lawyer who had volunteered, who had done some work on Title IX in Norman, where Norman schools have really pushed, and OU, this left agenda. And this state representative, Justin Humphrey, very bold, very straightforward, straight shooting guy, and he just said, we're not doing this, this isn't right, we don't have to do this because we checked it all out, it's not a legal requirement. But it was, the directive was that they were to set up, that schools were all to set up groups where the students would support and encourage these LGBTQ students, and it's about the idea of joining with and basically endorsing. That's the problem. You know, I'm not advocating that these children, students, whatever they think or whatever they do, I'm not advocating that anyone treat them badly, of course. But our state right now, I pulled out a whole stack of services we already have at the State Department of Ed. We have bullying, harassment, suicide prevention, mental health, counseling. Here in the school here at Elk City, there are many links to services. There's a, let's see, there was one specifically, mental health. There are several for mental health help, and then there is one for LGBTQ support, it says, thetrevorproject.org. That's already on the website at Elk City Schools Counseling. So I wouldn't, here's a picture from that website, so you know, it's very positive, supportive. Again, the issue is not that we don't care about all students, that we don't love all students, that we don't want all students to have support and be positive, you know, about them. This issue of their sexuality should never have been brought into the schoolhouse. It never should have been. It shouldn't be what we hear on TV all the time. Children, teenagers, young adults, they're hearing it. It's become so popularized. It's such a trend. And I've had superintendents from rural districts tell me, you wouldn't believe, we've got 5 in our school that say they're bisexual or they're, you know, binary, which means neither one or both. I mean, there are all kinds of labels. This website for GSA, which is Genders and Sexualities Alliance, the website for that group that is being set up here in Elk City, if if we don't see enough concern from the public, talking to the superintendent, to the school board members, and it's like right now. This just came out last week, and it says before Thanksgiving. You know, and I advocate in a firm but positive way, and I don't know if they even know that this was sent out. It may have been directed from the State Department of Ed, and nobody knows but the one person who ever sent it. That's a possibility. I've seen that before. And if they took grant money, it might have been in the fine print and they didn't know what they were getting into. I don't know all of those details. I really don't. Okay, so I went onto this GSA, Genders and Sexualities Alliance website, and I find that it is not just support, as I said. It is a very political activist with the ACLU attorneys backing them up. They want to change the participation in sports that we have put into law in Oklahoma to secure girls' sports. They call those, they call them no homo promo laws. That's what their websites say. GLSEN, which is Gays, Lesbians, Education Network, are part of this alliance. That's just one. This alliance includes like 40 statewide organizations, maybe not just all in Oklahoma, but different statewide organizations, and about 4,000 chapters. They've had one in Tulsa for a long time. Tulsa is, sadly, a liberal city that has become more so. It has flipped more and more, and I know some people still think of it as, you know, the buckle on the Bible belt. I've heard that, you know, the jewel on the buckle on the Bible belt with all of the Christian ministries that come out of there. But the Tulsa public school system has a superintendent that's as radical as we've got in the state. She pushes it to the left all the time, flies a gay flag at the headquarters at administration building, walks in the gay parade, as does the Oklahoma City superintendent, McDaniel. I've got pictures of him walking in the parade. Norman, yeah, Norman is another place. But, you know, we haven't thought Elk City, Sayre, Cheyenne, we haven't thought we could see anything like this. But the money rolled out after COVID. So we've got all of these federal funds. I made a list of the ones I found, and I know I did not find everything because I wasn't trying to. I just thought, I'm going to pull a bunch of these down. But it started in 2018, millions and millions of dollars going to schools. 118 schools got counselor core money for mental health. This is all mental health. But there were like 6 different major bundles of millions of dollars from the federal government that are going into these services, wraparound services. Now, do I think we needed more counseling? Yes, I do. Actually, it's right in front of me here. The State Department made grants for mental health counseling. October the 5th, 2018, Hoffmeister announces school mental health grants totaling $12.5 million, and that's Project Aware. Came to Western Oklahoma to 3 schools, Weatherford, Elk City, Woodward. That started in 2018. Now, I don't think we saw what we're seeing now start in 2018. No. This has all been coming out of a framework, and I'll talk about that. In September of 2020, a second AWARE grant went out to 3 more schools in a different area. It was Ada and 3 others. And then October the 1st, 2020, there were, didn't say how much that one was. The third one, the third grant, but it was not in AWARE. It was $15.2 million. It was federal money, October the 1st, 2020. June 30th, 2021, over $35 million awarded to 181 school districts for Oklahoma School Counselor Corps from federal relief funds. September 2021, another AWARE grant to 3 different schools, and so that's 9 doing the AWARE. And that's a 5-year grant. I believe it is 5. October 13th, 2021, Hoffmeister announces $9 million school grant to support students' mental health needs. Okay, so that's many, many millions of dollars going out to really rev this up, and you know, she's running for governor, right? Switch to Democrat, running for governor. I mean, it's clear to me she's getting her plans in place and started to finish up. You know, just really this is the focus. When I ran against her in 2018, she started that fall the Adverse Childhood Experiences meetings across the state. Take a drink. Adverse childhood experiences. Who could be against helping children? And children that have been in adverse situations. Violence, trauma-informed teaching. You know, it all sounded so good to so many people. And again, we needed more counseling in some schools. We certainly did. So it's easy to think, oh, this is a good thing. Well, as these things get rolled out, just like this says, and I'm not saying the person that's in it even did much research. I don't know. Maybe they were sent this and said, you know, we need to do this and set up some groups. I don't know. But it says a safe and supportive environment. But the GSA website, the Genders and Sexualities Alliance website, says they can set up community meetings, and they should be educating themselves and the broader school community about LGBTQ agenda issues. That's what they're talking about, and about social justice, about race, social justice, taking action, changing your school climate. So this is a matter of political activism, not really just to come together and love these kids and support them, okay? Trans youth, this is from GSA also, trans youth denounce efforts to restrict access to healthcare and athletics. That's what I mentioned a while ago. State houses in Colorado, Florida, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and South Dakota have proposed bills that would block students who are transgendered attempting to restrict transgender athletes' access to sports teams. Well, we did pass a bill here to help protect girls' sports, and this was probably, this was last January 2020. So we've done that since this article came out, but I've seen other things on their website where they're just blasting it. They're very angry. They've got a map showing all the states that need to be targeted. Department of Ed, show up for trans youth now. Political attacks on trans and non-binary students escalated quickly, and this is from this year, March. Escalated quickly in recent years as state legislators across the country introduced bills to limit the ways in which trans students and trans girls in particular get an education. These efforts were aided by the previous Department of Ed, meaning Trump's Department of Ed, whose leadership explicitly refused to hear civil rights complaints from trans students and rolled back guidance meant to protect their rights to a safe and supportive school environment. So what do they call them, a safe and supportive school environment? Everything they want, and educate the community and bring more people in. It's not about kindness, it's not about fairness, it's not about having an avenue if you've been harmed, if you've been harassed, if you've been bullied. We've got that. We've got all of that set up. It's in law. It's in our state standards for safety for schools. We've already got that. So this is about an effort to push out, and bring more people in. More people in. Wouldn't they feel more accepted and happy if everybody joined in the Gay Pride Parade? In Oklahoma City, the Gay Pride Parade about 4 years ago, it was in the Gazette newspaper. I wrote an article about it. I write in the Oklahoma Constitution, and on that paper there's a link for that. You can find it if you want. It's in there, but I wrote about this situation in Oklahoma City where Republican Mayor David Holt, and I knew his mother, Mary Ann, was a friend, but anyway, she's passed, but But David was right there at their awards ceremony where they gave Colors of the Rainbow to various gay activists in the community, or they weren't necessarily gay or lesbian, but they were supportive professionals. One of them was with the Oklahoma County Health Department, and she was called the Queer Education Educator, sex educator. Okay, going into the whatever schools let her in, probably Oklahoma City. Okay, I don't know that for sure, but she went somewhere. And the other one that I remember just off the top of my head was a doctor at OU Medical Center who did transitioning surgeries and chemical treatments for children starting at age 9. And it was in their article saying that, her name, everything. And she said that she supported these children when they didn't have their parents' support. I bet so. I bet so. Okay, so we have Educate to Liberate. This is from GSA again. And this guy is from, well, let me get it right. Not a guy, he's a two, he's a binary. He's a he and a she. He, she. Have you heard? I mean, this is
Him.
logically, our minds can't even comprehend because they're using the plural pronoun. They, we, because they have, and in the Native American community, they call it two spirits. So they call it 2S, two spirits. They've got a whole page for that. I've got it here with me somewhere. But this fellow, girl guy, Hendricks Olson, anyway, here's a picture of him. He's from Oklahoma. And he's out in New Mexico now where he's a GSA network coordinator. Okay, again, links are there on that page. You can look at it for yourself, and if you get arguments or anger or pushback from people you try to talk to, they're just going to have to see it for themselves, because they'll often say in these situations I've seen before, and this is it's getting worse than it's ever been, okay? It's been bad in the past, but it's getting worse, obviously. We all know that. Resources, here's the Two-Spirit Initiative. You know, they've got the nice symbol of the Native American with the feathers, two feathers. And it's a GSA network. We'll launch a Two-Spirit Initiative to bridge the gap between Native youth organizing and LGBTQ plus youth organizing. Okay, that's probably enough of that. You get it. You can read more if you want to see it. Okay, I mean, and you really need to if you're going to explain to someone else and guide them through some of this so they can figure out what in the heck is happening, you know, what has happened. This document is from the State Department of Ed, this next one that I'm going to talk about, and it is a framework. It's called a framework. And it was put together for counselors. It's called the Comprehensive Framework for School Counselors, Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counselor Framework. It's 174 pages, so I just printed a few off, and I'm going to pull a few things out to mention. Permission was received. This is the very first page. There's a cover with a picture, you know, a counselor playing with some kids. It's a very nice picture. And then the first page. Permission was received to model the Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework after the ASCA National Model. I learned some 30 years ago that we need to do our own model, and if we want some ideas from the national or other states, we can incorporate that. But we need to have control of what we put in our schools, and if we don't, then we're going by whatever they add or change or whatever they say. So this is what the State Department of Ed has produced and sent out to all the counselors with all this money and all that they're doing now. It says that the ASCA is the American School Counselor Association, and it provides professional development, publications, resources, research, advocacy to school counselors around the globe. Okay, so these are experts, but it's a global worldview. They deal with mindsets and behaviors. That's in the documentation. Measurable mindsets and behaviors of students to be recorded, to be measured, to be compared with progress as they meet the goals that are established. A couple of the articles I linked by Jane Robbins, who's an attorney with the American Principles Project. Jane Robbins has written, and I'll go through those in just a minute, but she's written about this, and it is really Common Core aligned. Common Core was not just some standards that were not real good. It was a matter of getting things into a coded system that can be data entered into the computer for longitudinal study. I don't know if you've heard this terminology about data-driven decision-making. And we all need data. If we're going to balance our checkbook, we need data. If we need, we need to know how much our bills are, we need that data. So we use data. But data-based decision-making for people that want to control from the top down, from the federal government and the state, when they're joined together, it's a statism, centralized control. And what we have is data being entered. I'm not saying we're there yet, but this is where it is going. You can read their documents, it's all right there. Okay, so looking on down, it says, first page, Toni Morrison. You know who Toni Morrison is? A very liberal artist. I don't remember. I've heard her on some of the, left talking shows when I just flipped through. But she's not an expert in child behavior, child development, mental health, but they're quoting her. She's on Oprah, okay? That's who I'm talking about. If there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. The Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework is the unwritten book that we desire to read. To the school counselors of Oklahoma, may this framework guide you, but may your heart for your students lead the way. This was approved through the U.S. Department of Justice. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice has recently been involved in schools, inserting themselves, ordered to by President Obama, who was written a letter by the National State School Board Association. NSBA wrote a letter, National School Board Association, wrote a letter to President Biden and asked for federal law enforcement to come into schools on the local level because there was concern for violence. Parents were speaking up, speaking out, acting out, calling for federal involvement, federal law enforcement. Well, it's a very long letter, okay? There's a whole lot more to it. And again, any of these things you want that come to your mind, I can send them to you. But what happened? President Biden ordered the Department of Justice to send out a memo to the FBI and the law enforcement agencies. That's a number of them, not just the FBI. And he did that. If you saw him on any of the interviews, Merrick Garland, A.G. Garland, would not back off of that order 1 inch. He was pressed by Tom Cotton out of Arkansas, Congressman Cotton. He was pressed by Hawley, H-A-W-L-E-Y, congressman or senator from Missouri. Yeah, Missouri. And anyway, 2 or 3 Ted Cruz, 3 or 4 I saw. There were more probably. But I mean, they drilled him. And he said that he got his information to go ahead and act on that from the letter. Well, the letter had no legal authority. It was not even sent to local school boards. It was not, there was no approval from the bottom up. And they're supposed to be representing our local school boards through the state association. And on the state association board, we have members who are local school board members from local districts around the state. So, in other words, there's a process for representation, right? Because we, the people, elect the local school board. And they should never have taken any kind of action like that without a majority of people in states saying we need that help. Well, they didn't need that help because they all said nothing, or what they said, like 23, something like that, answered and said, we do not agree with this letter at all. About 5 or 6 of the states are now not members now of the national board. They pulled out. One was already out, like Tennessee, but about 5 others pulled out. So that means they've lost those dues. That's how they run. The state pays dues to the national. In Oklahoma, I'm not happy that our executive director, Sean Heim, did not ever make a public statement against that letter. He was sent a letter by a group of senators, Julie Daniels out of Bartlesville, and a group with her, Republican senators, sent him a letter and asked him to denounce that. And he didn't even answer back. Then a group of House members, state representatives did the same thing. He still did not answer. I called 2 state school board members that I knew and asked them, as soon as I saw that national letter, I said, do you know about this? What do you think? Well, you know, we're for local control. And they're on the state board with Sean Heim. So I'm told now, well, in fact, I was sent a copy of the letter. He sent a letter finally after the National School Board Association came out and apologized for the letter because it was so bad. The woman that wrote it was the president of the National School Board. President Obama's Secretary of Ed Cardona, Secretary of Ed Cardona, appointed her over to the National Assessment of Education Progress, National Education Test Board, to help redesign that. So she's over there. Okay, she's going to be doing some things there. Well, they have gotten rid of the people that were in charge at the National School Board Association. Sean Heim sent a letter out to all of I think it was to all the local boards members, I believe. If it wasn't, it went to all the state board members, and then they were supposed to tell their local districts, I guess. It's kind of like that. But this is not the way to handle things. That was very dangerous. In fact, parents were called potentially domestic terrorists in the letter. They said that. That's how extreme it was. It was very extreme. And another thing that happened, on my handout, I've got this quote. Well, it's not a quote. It's the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states. All power, unless it's explicitly named in the Constitution to the federal government, it belongs to the state respectively, or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment. And I've read history on that, and it wasn't written because we didn't already have that. They just were making it clear. Because what do people with power do? Often, they just want more of it, more control, more power. I mean, that is kind of the human nature, the sin nature of humankind, right? And that's what we've seen. So, one thing I saw in that letter, the National State School Board Association letter calling parents domestic terrorists potentially, and naming about 20 different situations that were not even, you go back and check them out, and that's what our congressman nailed him about, like, well, what about this? This was this, and that was that. Well, yeah, but there was whatever. He just tried to dodge it like a bureaucrat always does. But I noticed in their letter, the National School Board Association letter, that they used very specific legal language that was regarding interstate commerce. Really weird in a letter about school boards and parents. And well, I had learned 30 years ago that that is what the federal government hangs its hat on to get into local education if we let them. They say it's for interstate commerce. So I guess parents disrupting a school board meeting or getting too loud or too upset would cause businesses to shut down. Across the state line, there was nothing about interstate commerce in that situation. So it was a legal document, which is still, like I said, the order to send the law enforcement is still standing. But we have lots of people that are not putting up with that federal overreach, a lot of people. Let me go to just a couple of things, and then I'll give you a little bit of something different here. The new sex education Common Core would force explicit images, gender mayhem, and abortion on kids. There are new standards that we did not adopt in Oklahoma, but they line right up with what is in this framework for counselors. And it's all of the sex ed you can imagine and things we can't imagine. On top of that is equity, social justice, racial systemic bias. All of that is integrated in to the national sex ed standards. And it aligns with this document for counselors. So there's an article on that, and you can pull up those actual standards. And, you know, the critical race theory has been boo-hooed or poo-pooed by a lot of people, saying that is not real. We're not teaching that. Well, critical race theory is a college level intellectual theory. No, they're not teaching that, right? Okay, but the concepts, the ideology, the methods, material, mindset, behavior that you want to see demonstrated that lines up with that ideology is when people want that pushed, wherever that's happening, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Norman, and wherever they can get it in. So that's an important thing for us to see, because it is it's coming down our pipeline, and we can stop it. I do believe we can stop it. They do not want parents leaving public schools in droves. After all, how can people be changed and the culture be changed if they're not in there to be changed, right? And charter schools, I know a lot of people have enjoyed Epic Online and other online charter schools out here, and I'm not against people having a choice, but we've got to see that if we don't get this stuff stopped and have control over what happens in public ed, they are also public ed. So that curriculum and those tests are public school, and they're approved or disapproved by the State Department of Ed. And I've been told that some of this is already coming into some of those charters already. So we're going to see more of that. So private schools are not touched by this unless people there want to bring it in. Okay? And it has happened in a few private schools, even some Christian schools. We've seen it in some Christian denominations, haven't we? So-called.
What's Christian?
What? What's Christian? Yeah, we have to get back to the Bible and read that and see what the Word tells us, because we're seeing all kinds of definitions, aren't we? Okay, there's another article over there, social emotional learning. I don't know if you've heard this terminology, but SEL, social emotional learning. And it has been something that could have been done in a way that could have been very nice and acceptable, but we're getting that hijacked as well. And this paper, so we've got two papers on it that you can pull over there, and this is from a think tank, Pioneer Institute. So they do a lot of, research, and this is not just a touchy-feely, big-funded, pie-in-the-sky ideal. Because a lot of this liberal ideology is just people's wishful thinking, that they're going to make the world better, and this globalist mindset of everyone. If we don't have religion dividing us, right? If we don't have differences of views, if we can all just come together and have unity, that's really what this is about. At the bottom, not just at the bottom, at the top and all the way through. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time to start really seeing that, this ideology. Okay, this article is by, two of them are by Jane Robbins, who is with American Principles Project and also with Pioneer Institute. This one is How Socio-Emotional Learning Became Another Vehicle for Anti-White Racism. and how it can be integrated into these lessons on your emotions and social situations. Now, CASEL is an organization called, it's CASEL for short, C-A-S-E-L, Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It's a nonprofit organization. It's affiliated with the United Nations. They've got a program in Oklahoma City schools from them, CASEL. CASEL is all through Joy Hoffmeister's framework for counselors. It's all through it, referred to CASEL. Also in that, I need to tell you a few more things that are in there that just need to be brought out. What is systemic change? This again is the counselor's framework for Oklahoma counselors. What is systemic change? Quoting Maya Angelou, another Oprah Winfrey guest, and I mean that's the easiest way to define, you know, just a very liberal performer, poet, I think. Schools are a system, and we need systemic change. And they use this in terms of racial bias, systemically biased. The system is biased. And I listened to a debate on the House floor 2 years ago, the Oklahoma House of Representatives, with a bill presented by a woman who said that black children's birth rate was lower because of what do they call it? You're unaware of it, unknown bias, you're unaware that you're biased, as though healthcare providers or nurses were biased because the child was a black child. And it was just so disconnect. I mean, I'm not saying there's never been anybody in the world that was like that, but to write a bill and the State Department of Health was supporting it, or somebody there was. Well, it passed the House. 20 people voted against it. But it passed the House, and fortunately COVID shut down the state capitol for a while, and it never got through the Senate, never went through the Senate. So after that, the critical race theory, you know, teaching where children coming home saying, am I bad, Mom, because I'm white, am I bad, you know. I have black friends, and they, you know, they're conservative Christians. I think that's ridiculous stuff. I have a friend in Utah, Gary Thompson. He's a child psychologist, and he's married to a white woman. She's a child psychologist. He said, so what do I do? You know, my wife hates me, and I don't know it. We have children, which half of them likes me. You know, how do we sort this out when you bring that kind of ideology into a society, much less a school, where children have to figure this stuff out. Okay, so another person quoted at the bottom of this page, State Department of Ed, Oklahoma State Department of Education, School Counseling Framework. Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu quoted about helping other people and, you know, that kind of thing. You know, here are the experts, right? I mean, why are we hearing three far left that have nothing to do with government, education, or child development or mental health? Okay. Okay, I've got to read this. Mindsets and behaviors, we talked about that, being measurable. Here's the page where that is. And again, that link to this document is there. You'll find it if you want to do that. On page 152 of the document it says, and this is for a school counselor, am I required to tell parents or caregivers everything a student tells me if they are under 18 years old? No. No. ASCA ethical standards. Whose ethical standards? ASCA, American School Counselors Association. Their ethical standards states that school counselors keep information confidential unless legal requirements demand. Anyway, it goes on. But right, first thing it just says no. And then it goes into kind of a halfway, well, there are times you need to talk to, well, some counselors are going to take that and what might your child talk to a counselor about that you really do need to know? Oh, and here's the part that really troubled me. this sentence, a school counselor should not break confidentiality even if a school counselor thinks that the caregiver's parents should be aware. Okay. And then I've got an article that you'll find on the links about Joy Hoffmeister's agenda. And, you know, sometimes you can just read a little bit of this and then you have to rest. Go watch a beautiful scene in a movie, or sit down and relax and then pray and rest, because it can be overwhelming. The centralized control of government is not new. America, we are unique. We've had 200 years of freedom, and we know 200 plus years of freedom, and we know that every other government has fallen into that place of centralizing the power and control over the people. So I will just read this. Consider this quote: the Roman Empire and seemingly every other successive government eventually enforces the principles of statism. Statism is that doctrine and or practice of vesting complete control in a centralized governmental power. It's a federal bureaucracy that offers full benefits to its citizens, which includes total planning, which removes individual responsibility and authority taken from the writing of the government of Rome, a story about that, which banished Apostle John to the Isle of Patmos. And we know what was happening in Rome to Christians at that time, and I think we have to be spiritually, mentally aware of what's going on in this world. And these are things that I would like to have rather had a different presentation tonight. But when that survey came, it's like, I have to. I'm obligated here. I cannot avoid it. I don't want enemies that just get mad at me because I'm talking about whoever sent it. I don't know who it was, but whoever it was, I hope that if someone finds that out and can talk to them and go through some of these documents and talk with them. But everyone that has children in school in Elk City really should be talking with their school board members. And I don't think it's every school at all, but there are certain programs that certain schools have taken or got money for, and it's put them in a place that's made it more of a push. I had a superintendent call me from Eastern Oklahoma the other day, and he said, Linda, my school counselor is well qualified, highly qualified, has his degrees, does a great job. He does not need to be retrained. But the State Department of Ed is retraining him. He said, I don't think we're going to stay in this. He said, we'll just send the money back. And that's what needs to happen, because if you've ever heard this picture of what happens with government money, you've got the carrot and the stick. Here's the carrot. Come along, little donkey. You know, come along. Well, you're going to help children, right? Oh yeah, I want that. I want to do that. Well, you take the money. The money is the carrot too. Carrot is the money too. You take the money, you do that good thing you think you're doing, and then here comes the stick. You're in trouble, because it's going to be way different than what you thought sometimes, and more so all the time now. So actually, I'm a hopeful person. As Sandy said, faith gives us that hope, and not faith in myself, not faith in this world, not faith in reading or figuring something out. I can't even keep it straight unless the Lord gives me the clarity to see something in some kind of an order, because really it's a lot of stuff. So faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, that's where my faith is. And I believe most of the people here tonight and most of the people in this community certainly do not want the conscience of their children to be seared to discern relationships. And I'm not saying to be mean to anybody, be nice to everybody. I am, I mean, I try to be. And I just think that we've got to draw these lines, and it's landed on our lap right here. So, as they say in that movie right here in River City, here we are, and it's happening right here. So, I'll answer questions. If anyone has questions, I don't want to just leave that.
Is there a website or a place I could research on what grant money is going to specific schools? Like I'm in the Cheyenne School District, and I'd like to see what grant money they're receiving, just.
Okay, yeah, so let me, do you want to hand those out, Sandy?
Yes.
If you might want to. Or just hand them out at the end and they can pass them. I brought 40 copies, if you can share if you're with someone, and if not, if you run out, I've got some business cards, I'll give you that and you can contact me and I'll send it to you. But I don't remember that there were 181 that got the counselor core. Now, I really don't know what all is being pushed through various programs. Is it coming through one first or what? But I'm just saying, I pulled it right off the State Department of Ed website. So what I saw before, let me just go back to my background in getting into the political arena, which was not my plan. I had a plan, and I was going to get my doctorate over at NSU in optometry because I worked with vision therapy after I taught special education. I taught at Hinton, I taught at Lokiba, and then when Dan and I moved over to Fort Gibson, we moved there so I would be close to Tahlequah so I could get my doctorate. Well, my plan was to get my doctorate, have my own practice, and do vision therapy and work with students, which I've done for about 10 years in Oklahoma City with Dr. Oliphant. And what I did, I was appointed by our principal to be on a local committee. And that committee was writing a school plan called the Comprehensive Local Education Plan. It was something that was done every 5 years. So it was just kind of a normal process. But we had a new superintendent. He came straight from the State Department of Ed. This was in 1993. Came from the State Department of Ed, and he told us right up front on this committee, we're going to make a radical change. We're going to have a new program, and it's a radical change. We're going to be one of 10 pilot schools to put in this new program, outcomes-based education. So no one knew what that was. I went home, I called the State Department of Ed. They had one person that was the expert, but he had only done a little bit of a model in his school in Medill. He really couldn't tell me much at all. I asked for research, I asked for information. The principal gave me her file, which she'd gotten at the state senate, because they put this into law. It was in House Bill 1017. It said we would meet or exceed North Central Accreditation Association's outcomes process for accrediting schools. Well, I even had conservative Christian homeschool senator stand in a Baptist church in Edmond and argue with about 200 people in the room that I was wrong about that, because North Central is this institution that's been around for 100 years. That part of 1017 is just fine. I said, I'm sorry, but I've been to their meetings, I've been to their area meetings, and I've got their books, and I'm telling you, this is a new process. It's called outcomes accreditation, and it was, and now everybody knows that, books have been written about it, outcomes-based education. It said in the learner outcomes, which are standards for students, it said that first graders will monitor their own reading progress. Really? I mean, you don't have to be around a lot of kids to realize that's not going to work too good, They need to learn to read, and they don't do that alone. Some kids do pretty good and do a lot, but what's the school for? What are we sending them to school for? So we have learner outcomes, and then the other part of it, that's just one example. The math was, the fuzzy math. We got all of that back then, fuzzy math. It was unusual, like Common Core math. It didn't make sense. But it was supposed to be higher level thinking skills. But they're not teaching them basic computation, basic facts. What's wrong with flashcards and drills that help children memorize? And if they can't do it verbally, they can do it visually, or they can learn to count things out and teach them a lot of different ways. But that traditional math has been thrown out with outcomes-based education, then again with Common Core. So that's what I ended up doing, was finding out that I was either going to say, no, I oppose this new plan, or sign on to the document and say I'm part of putting it in, because I was on the committee. I said no. I said education has got to have academic wording in the mission statement and the vision statement. Well, no. Well, how about this, Linda? They're citizens in the 21st century, global citizens. You know, no. Where is the reading, writing, and math? Where are the academic skills that need to be focused? And one day, our superintendent, he actually liked me. We got along just fine. He knew I saw right through him, and he was trying to push this because this is his career. It's going to advance if he puts this in. And that's what happens with a lot of professional people. They just go to these meetings, they get processed, they learn the process, and they do it. They try to do it the best. So they get advanced up the ladder. And they don't think about what they're doing sometimes. And some of them haven't been educated well enough to know. They just, how about Teach for America? I hope you don't have them sitting here, but Teach for America is big in Tulsa. They've even built apartments for them. Teach for America trained 5 weeks. They're not educators. They're quick-trained young people that come in, and then they get to be the smarty pants because they're the ones that know how to relate to these children. They're young, they're vibrant. Sandy Garrett, I'm Joy, I'll do that. Joy Hoffmeister, I like Sandy Garrett, but Joy Hoffmeister said that, you know, they are inspirational. She gave them $14.6 million just a few weeks ago. Teach for America. I pulled Marxist, Maoist statements off of Oklahoma City Public Schools' Teach for America website, where those young teachers had put those up, and the pictures of them, and you know, it's, we have got a situation that I've seen before. It's just worse now. When we had this before, we repealed outcomes-based education and the standards were rewritten. The Senate in Oklahoma City voted unanimously, 100%, to kill those learner outcomes. They had that first graders will monitor their own reading, you know, bad math, no good traditional math, and it had sex education starting in first grade with reproductive parts being part of the anatomy that they learn. And there were senators on both sides of the aisle standing up saying, my kids are not doing this and my grandkids are not doing this. And so they killed them. And the very next day, Sandy Garrett and Bernice Shedrick had a press conference and said, oh, we're rewriting the standards. Yeah, they did. And we got pass. That's where we got priority academic student skills, which are pretty good traditional academics. And we actually got a good rating on those from Fordham Institute just before Common Core rolled in and rolled them over. Yeah, and then we got Common Core. Common Core, Jeb Bush. Okay, let's talk about the Republicans. I've talked about the Democrats. Jeb Bush, Common Core. Janet Barisi was elected state superintendent. Jeb Bush came to Oklahoma. Mary Fallon had him there. I know I'm Republican, she's Republican, but I don't care. I spoke at the state capitol. And John Bennett knows this, okay? He appointed me to this, so if he wants to remove me, he can, but I don't think he will. Okay, Chairman Bennett knows. We've got people that end up doing the same agenda that we, and that's what I said at the state capitol. I said, Governor Fallon knows this is the very same thing as outcomes-based education, which she opposed then. It's the same thing. New name, reworked a little bit, but she was in the National Governors Association and she became the head of the National Governors Association the next year. And she had to sit at their national meeting as the head of that, all the governors in the nation. She was the head. She had to sit there in that meeting when we had just repealed Common Core. Thank you, Tom Ivester. Senator Ivester voted to repeal it, and so did enough that we did repeal it. Unfortunately, when State Superintendent Hoffmeister came into office, she says she's a conservative. She says she opposed Common Core, but Common Core is all through it, and you can find it all over the documentation. It is not hidden even. And so it pushes the bottom up and pushes the top down. It takes off top academic levels, and it gives a narrower set of objectives or goals. And then you're going to measure those goals. It's going to go in the computer. It's all going to be streamlined. It's like a manufacturing process rather than a human interaction with teachers. So why in Tulsa are teachers being told? I had a teacher call me the other day who had just moved to Oklahoma from another state. She's taught for 18 years. She said, I'm a reading specialist, teaching 3rd grade. She said, I don't know what's going on in this school. She said, it doesn't make any sense. I've got people over me that are not even educators telling me I'm not doing a good job and that I can't take my kids to the library to pick out a book. I have to keep them online all the time for reading for all of their subjects. In that building she's in, CKLA, Core Knowledge Language Arts, that's their reading program. I analyzed that about 5 years ago. A teacher sent me her key to online to look at what she was being told she had to teach. She said, Linda, I'm a Christian. This other teacher, like 5 years ago, Susan, she said, I'm a Christian. I can't teach this. She said, they want me to put a poster up of a Muslim imam. I think she said Mohammed, 4th grade. She said, look at this. I want you to see this. I want you to tell me what you see. Okay, so I went through it, and I wrote about the 1st grade level, and it had Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. For 1st graders, lots of informational stuff, a lot more about Islam, and it said they all believe in one God. Yeah? Technically, theocracy, one God. Yeah, technically. But is that the same God? No. And what would a 1st grader think? Oh, they all believe in God. So do we see the globalist mindset of unity? I mean, I know this is radical stuff, but I'm not making it up.
That's real as a heart attack.
It's radical stuff. Core knowledge, language arts. So here's this teacher just the other day confirming once again what I knew I had seen and believed they were still involved in. And these teachers all told me, the ones I've talked to all have told me that the buildings they've been in, everything had to be online. No teacher's manuals, no books, everything's online. And they're getting ready to go to a system where it's individualized, so it will level the lesson down or up depending on the student's performance. So they're collecting student data for one thing, but another thing, individualized, how would a teacher with 20 kids, 30 kids know what any student gets? Can you watch all of those at once? No. It's not going to be the same lesson. It's going to be different things. Tulsa Public Schools mask policy. You can be exempt if your child has social emotional learning needs, they say. But will they really? They're not honoring the medical exemptions for the people that they want to probably get rid of, that don't cooperate with them, that don't do their, thing the way they want it done. In other words, they don't want well-educated, good teachers when they have a system going like that, if they're going to ask questions or cause a problem or know a better way that it should be done. And it's just really hard on good teachers, so I have great compassion for them. So the thing is, these things can all happen here. Not just, so I want you to know I'm not just talking about LGBTQ, okay? I wouldn't have even probably talked about that tonight. But that's what the issue is with this survey, and it needs to be known. See?
So we've invited school board members here. I don't know if any school board member is here. There is.
Yep.
But can they reach out to you?
Sure.
For more
I'll give you
information?
my card. Well, you got my number anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, can school board members
Sure,
personally
they
contact
can,
you?
and I mean, I would, go in their office and talk with them and give them some information if they need it.
Yeah, so if they're willing with different schools. So some of the school superintendents or the school board don't even know that this is in their school?
Well, I can't assume that anybody knows but the person that's in it. They
So
know
it's-
they've received money, but do they know what was in the fine print, and was it even in the fine print?
So we need to check in every school. to make
Right,
sure.
I mean, I would just say this, all parents, teachers need to just keep your eyes open. Grandparents, we need to keep our eyes open, we need to find out if there is a sex education lesson coming. The honorable thing is to put it in the policy that they will let parents know and they can opt into it. Some parents want that, not too many, but, you know, I'm just saying, if they feel like their hands are tied on things, they can still give people an opt in and at the least an opt out. But you gotta know in advance or you can't opt out. It's already happened.
Right.
Well, gee, next time I would opt out, but it's already done, you know. And so these policies need to be looked at, and we just need to listen to our children, our grandchildren, and find out what's happening in their school. And here in Elk City, I hope parents will hear about this, enough parents, that their children have told them. And, you know, the kids may think it's great. They may think it's great. But they need to look at that website because they're bringing in more than a comfort and support group. Okay? Yes?
The annual Ed Quality Ranking in the Tulsa World article that came out ranked Oklahoma number 47 in the nation. What is, you've talked, has, you know, what you've done on the sex ed and in the past, but what is GOP organization doing right now to combat that? We're number 47.
Well, I'll just say this, first of all of this stuff takes the place of the time that is needed for reading, writing, and math, for that foundational academic focus. And that's what needs to happen. I wrote a paper about the OBE, Common Core, same thing. It's a paradigm shift from academics. It destroys academics to a great degree because you just have so much time, money, and energy in any given day. And the students just have so much, you know, ability to sit and focus and learn, but it's the time taken out. So that's one major thing that's been happening. Plus, the Common Core results have been very poor nationwide. And like I said, even though it's not called Common Core in Oklahoma, it is a Common Core-like system set up, and it is not working in other places either. But 47, I don't really know why we would be that much lower. It may be because it's not even aligned with the curriculum. I mean, the State Department of Ed, the standards, the curriculum, and the testing at times have not been aligned, and it's not the teacher's fault. It's not the teacher's fault. It's coming, you know, they get directives to do this, and then this part's not matching up. Because if you're going to be tested, it needs to line up with your curriculum you're teaching. If you're not teaching what they're going to test, you're not going to do well on that test. So we've had that problem, and you know, textbooks were removed to a great extent, and that's one thing Joy Hoffmeister was saying publicly in her campaign in 2018, that, you know, she was complaining about the legislature taking money for textbooks, that it wasn't being funded like it had been. Well, she had requested that. I was told that by legislators that met with her. She wanted it more in technology. So part of what we're looking at is so much change, so much being rolled out that cannot even be fully implemented and utilized before something else rolls out. And we just had a lot of that thrown at our teachers. Comparing other states, that's the name. National Assessment of Education Progress, that's what does the comparison. You just heard what I said about the woman appointed from the National School Board Association who wrote the letter that was outrageous. Now she's over on the NAEP working on that. So, you know, what's really in the NAEP now, I know even in the early 90s, there were behavioral things in it then, and a parent sued in Pennsylvania. I met her, Nita Hogue, in Pennsylvania, sued the federal government and won because she found in the testing they were asking questions for students about would you participate in this criminal activity and naming, you know, different things. They were trying to find what psychologists call the locus of control. Are you a leader or are you a follower? Why does the federal government need to know that? Yeah. It was coming out of the Carnegie Foundation out of Pennsylvania University, the name. So, How good is the NAEP? I'm not real sure how good the NAEP is, and what we need, and people that are longtime educators that have proven results believe we need to let teachers do the academic testing in the classroom. We can do formative testing, you know, that's a going thing. Well, a good teacher's always been checking their students through the year, not just the end of the year. Did you make it or not? You know, it's always through the year. That's what formative testing is. So we don't need a multi-billion-dollar global testing contract, which we have, to find out how to do a formative test. But to do a formative test that lines up with this system, we need that. Okay, I'll give you some hope. We have an election next year. We've got to fight for local control in the meantime, but next year there are people running for state superintendent. I'm not, so if you think I'm speaking because I am, I'm not running. Didn't plan to, will not do that. But Ryan Walters, who's Secretary of Education, is running, and John Cox, who is a superintendent over in Peggs, from a conservative rural community. He's been a superintendent for years. And there's another person that I think will give us, she's been training the same training programs that Joy Hoffmeister has now. So I will not be voting for her. But John Cox or Ryan Walters, if either one of them are elected, I think we will have a good person in there we can work with. And we've got to push back on this federal stuff. There's a lot of money that's been sent out. But I think with a good Attorney General, which we have, he's been fighting federal overreach already, you know, on the shots, the masks, and other things, federal overreach. It's about states' rights, it's about local rights, and it's about parents' rights, which are part of the local rights. So homeschooling is in our Constitution as by other means. That's what the Constitution of our state says. You can educate by other means. So it doesn't define it, doesn't regulate it, doesn't check it. We don't check in. Other states say they have freedom, that they have to check in with their testing or their curriculum. We don't have that. And we need to keep that free, and that needs to be distinct from the online charter, which are public schools that people do at home, and then they call it homeschool. Well, they're schooling at home, but they're not free like homeschooling is free. Okay, so I want to make that distinction. And so we've got good legislators in certain areas that will work with us, and we've got some laws being written now to try to get a handle on this. But it's going to take somebody elected in that state superintendent's office as well. And I think, you know, that that's a year away. A lot can happen
So
between now
will
and
you
then.
help write those laws to change the education?
Yes, on our OKGOP Education Committee, we've got 10 people. John Bennett, the state chairman, appointed me to be the chair of the committee, and he said, do it whatever you think needs to be done. You're the educator, and I want you. I've known him for a long time, so he trusted me to do what he would want to see done. So we've got 10 people on the committee, 2 from each congressional district, and they're educators. 1 is not. He's a businessman, but he's been on a couple of education commissions. He's had some experience. And he works with a group helping people get elected to school boards. So he's got an organization. But anyway, read down. But we've got Dr. Sargent, who is a professor of reading at NSU Tahlequah. He's in the Broken Arrow campus. He's a tenured professor at college. He's a Christian, a conservative. And I said, Stephen, aren't you concerned about your job? I don't want to get you in trouble, you know, coming to the GOP committee. And he said, no, I'm tenured. He said, it'll be all right. And so he's actually very honored there because he's a great reading teacher. And he's concerned because they're being told in their reading department that they're going to only do it one way. He's getting the same thing. I mean, it's like you don't really want to be so right sometimes when it's a bad picture, but it is. That's what's happening. And they're taking a good reading program and putting it online and telling them, you're only going to do this. And he's got a good reading teacher. I had Dr. Grace Burcham over at Southwestern, you know, in her last years there. She was a wonderful reading teacher. And she'd come out of the closet of the classroom with all of these different ways of teaching phonics and games and interaction. And and that was way before we had all this technology where you can do some things with it. But you need a lot of tools. I taught special ed. There are kids that need a different approach. One way is not going to fit everybody. So what are we going to do with those that don't fit into that, you know? They're going to end up with some kind of a job training certificate and not read very well. And there's nothing wrong with job training certificates, but I'm saying the plan is for the workforce to be working. And there are certain workers that won't advance because they're not educated. I call it an edgy training system. That's what I think it is. So, any other questions? I know you're all probably tired.
So you're telling us that we've got a lot of trouble in Oklahoma that people don't realize, right?
Yeah, and it really actually,
including myself, thought that, oh, I live in Oklahoma, and it's a pretty good place, but.
well, it is. We're far better off. Thank you all. We're far better off than many states are.
Fast.
Right. We pushed things back in the 90s, like that OBE. We vetoed that school to work bill. Governor Keating vetoed that. I was in his office as his advisor, and he had been through the campaign. You know, as governor, while I was running for state superintendent, he appointed me Secretary of Ed. It was Democrat controlled and I was Republican, so the Democrats voted against me. I wasn't confirmed. There were 12 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Well, that's politics. But he said, stay in my office. I want you to be a liaison with parents and teachers and, you know, work on education. So I did that. That's the year of the Oklahoma City bombing, which is a whole other story. So we had to drop everything, obviously, and deal with that. And at the end of that year, I went over to the Department of Labor. But the issue was that school to work bill, which would have put the federal Clinton, Robert Reich, Richard Riley. Riley was in Education Department. Reich was the Labor Department. It was radical stuff. They had a resume for high school students to give to employers that number rated their honesty from 1 to 10 on a resume. It was a behavioral, have you heard of the China system of smart cities where they give people social scores if they act right or talk right, and if they don't, they lose social credit, then they can't go to this place or get on that train. Social credit system is what it's called. And England's headed that way. And so we could see that technocracy, the control of government through technology. I said this the other day, it just came out real naturally. I said it's easier to control data than to control people.
Exactly.
They don't have to get out with their, you know, whips and, you know, guns or whatever and control people. They're controlling people with the data and just drop that score down and they can't go to the grocery store, they can't do whatever. Now, do I think we will go there? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying these things are lined up with a global control. We don't need a global testing company. We don't need a global aligned organization telling our school counselors how to set the mindsets and the behaviors of students. So, you know, I do have hope in the Lord. And I just have to stop and go, Lord, I don't know your plan. You know, I can read the Bible, I can see that this isn't going to last forever, this world as we know it. So are we there? I don't know. I just know while we're here, we're salt and light, or we're not, you know. And I want to be on the salt and light side, you know. I want to be on the let's stand and have hope. And I have some hope in western Oklahoma, you know, ranchers and farmers. And my grandpas were ranchers and farmers, and my mom is a 6th generation Texas rancher before Oklahoma. And, you know, they came with a lot of sturdiness, and most of our families are like that. We've got some, I think DNA does matter, but also your environment, you've learned, and resilience. That's one thing that's troubling in this behavioral stuff. They want to teach children resilience and grit and tenacity. And under Obama, the Federal Department of Education produced a document called Grit and Tenacity, or Resilience, whichever, but it was grit in one of them. And they had biometric feedback for body temperature and heart rate, and are they calm, are they stressed? I mean, this is like a lab rat social engineering design. And there are people who think we've got to have a planned economy, and K-12 education is part of that because the workforce. So they want the workforce to have a global mindset where they're accepting of all people, and there's not that conflict that you get when you have different opinions about politics and religion. So why would they teach, once again, back full circle again, why would they teach? You know, first graders, they all believe in one God. So I think we expose what we find, and we try to be kind but not weak, you know. There's a way to be strong and not be, I mean, if we just go up there screaming all the time, that won't probably get us anywhere, you know, and nobody will listen. We've got to sit down and get these things on the table. But there needs to be a firm, responsible response coming from Delp City Schools as to where this came from, this survey. They don't have to tell where it came from, but they need to find where it came from and how to stop it. Because that was not sent with parental approval. And just asking, you know, children to come together. Well, are they going to feel bad? What's going to happen in a school? At lunch, before Thanksgiving. If you don't, oh, are you going to that meeting? No, I'm not going. Well, why not? You know, are you, you know, look at the division it starts bringing right up front. In my opinion, that's divisive. I told a teacher here in Elk City yesterday that I talked to on the phone, I said, when you have a football game, kids can play football if they're good at that, they can cheer, they can work in the concession stand, they can, you know, sell t-shirts, they can be in the band, you know, but that brings unity. You know, we've got things that we can do with kids that make everybody comfortable and accepted for their humanity, for being a human that we care about. Okay. So, thank you very much. I'll be glad to stay if you have questions. Thank you.